Robert, thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Wanted to get your thoughts on the upcoming legislative session. What are the big issues?
Well, given the activity we've had over the summer, the big issues are going to continue to be education, number one, especially since there looks to be a concerted effort to overhaul the MAEP system. And so I'm sure that's going to be, one of the major issues we deal with. I continue to say, if you want to create jobs and put working people in a better position economically, you got to do something about our infrastructure, and that's going to take some investment. And so I would hope that we have not abandoned that discussion and look at doing something about that.
When it comes to the budget, state budget,
Yes.
do you think that's another big issue, and what concerns you?
Well, what concerns me is we passed some major tax cuts that won't be in place probably for another year and a half. But we spent the summer examining the overall tax structure in the state. And what concerns me is that we spent a lot of time looking at and talking about how we're going to save money and what we're going to do, which is fine. I think that's a very prudent, very good stewardship. But our primary purpose as government is to provide services, and we need to do that in at least in adequate fashion. And so saving money is one thing, but being efficient and providing services is another. And so I'm concerned that we spend so much time talking about how much money we've saved, and we're not doing anything about the services we need to provide to our citizens. And that goes from education to health care to infrastructure.
We have a new president coming up in January, President-elect Trump.
Yes.
I just want to get your take on what a Trump presidency could mean for Mississippi.
Well, we're a state that primarily relies on federal funding. More than 50% of our money for highways comes from the federal government, almost 80% of our educational funding, 90% of our health care funding. And Mr. Trump has described himself as a businessman, being for the working man, the everyday woman and man, which I appreciate and I respect. And I hope he holds true to that. If he is true to that without, putting aside all of the bigotry and the misogyny and all the things that he inflamed the public with during the campaign, he puts that aside and just deals with the issues. What I hope it would mean for Mississippi is that there'd be less gridlock in Washington with the Republicans controlling both houses and a Republican president, which would unlock some money. That may mean more money for infrastructure. That may mean, they're talking about redoing Obamacare or doing the Affordable Health Care Act, but he has softened that position to say we're going to tweak some things, which means that maybe that $9 billion that we turned down, maybe if it's somehow labeled under a Trump presidency, maybe we'll be willing to accept some of that money. It may, and I'd hope that would mean we expand Medicaid, but at the very least, what I would hope is that we provide an environment where people in the state of Mississippi can take full advantage of health care services.
Let's talk specifically about the two issues we discussed at the beginning of our conversation.
Sure.
First of all, education. Can you give me your impression of Edbuild?
I have not monitored that discussion, but what I can tell you that the only thing that troubles me about the whole thing is that we have a MAEP formula, a program that very well-versed and very conscientious people spent years working on. And to abandon that formula, to say there's something wrong with that formula without ever fully funding it, is to me a little bit hasty. Now, I don't think that abandoning the formula is the best way to go. But if there are people who feel like they want to at least look at something else, that's fine. But as you're looking at it, I would hope that we look at it with the eye of the children in our schools, the primary focus. And by that I mean the basic problem in education for me in the state of Mississippi is there are districts that have a lot of money and they've had the best education, and people who are in poor districts don't. And kids should not, what they receive out of our education system should not be based on where they live. Now, if there's not a system in place to make sure that it doesn't matter where you live, how much money your parents have, to say that that doesn't have any bearing on your education, that's the system I'm for. That's what MAEP provided. That's how it was balanced. That's what it looked at. If Edbuild doesn't do that, then it's not doing what we needed to do. The basic problem with education in the state of Mississippi is that you get a better education based on where you live, based on whether or not you live in a rich district or a poor district. And let me say this. They talk about saving money and not spending as much. We still are the lowest. We spend less per student of any other state in the Southeast. And we have the lowest outcomes. So it does have something to do with money. So, you know, the fact that we spend a lot of money on education doesn't necessarily mean we spend enough.
Let's talk about infrastructure.
Yes.
That was a topic that came up last session.
Yeah.
And in previous sessions as well. The governor even called for something to be done about fixing roads and bridges in our state.
Yeah.
Do you think this is the year where something can get done?
Well, I don't have a lot of hope for it. And the reason I say that is because in order to do something about the infrastructure, you got to spend some money. And you can't spend money if you're constantly giving it away. I mean, we're a poor state. And I just think it's not prudent to start giving major tax cuts to industry and to businesses that really don't need it, don't really ask for it. And at the same time, those businesses that you're trying to attract and locate here don't have adequate roads and bridges to move goods and services back and forth. So you can't have it both ways. So maybe what we need to do is before let's put a moratorium on these tax cuts. Maybe we need to take that money and spend it on our roads and bridges. And then when we get those fixed, maybe then we'll have room to maybe give some of the money back, because then those businesses will have a way to be more productive because they can come in and out of the state and move products and goods and services in and out better. You know, people always talk about, what does industry want? They want to come where they got great schools. Well, the first thing they want, and I haven't had this fail not one time, the first thing they want is good railroads, good roads, and a way to get stuff in and out. And that's what we need to do.
On the Democratic platform for this session, what are the issues besides the ones that we just talked about?
Well, our issue have always been how we're going to put more money in the pockets of working men and women. You don't do that by just cutting taxes. You know how you do that? You do that by creating jobs and creating opportunity. And you create jobs and opportunity by providing a place where people can work and have good paying jobs, adequate health care, and good schools for their kids. And that's going to always be our priority. But your focus can't be on major corporations or where you're going to give major tax cuts to corporations. Your focus has to be on the everyday man and woman, middle America, middle Mississippi, the working man and woman, the people that we've lost, thousands and thousands of jobs because we haven't concentrated on homegrown industry, homegrown business. You keep trying to attract international corporations to come in and provide 4,000 and 5,000 jobs. You got industry who have been here 3 and 4 generations. They may not employ but 200 or 300 people, but why would you forsake them? Let's take care of the people here at home first.
Let me just readjust here. Last year, there was some gridlock, especially when it came to reading bills aloud.
Yes.
Obviously, some tension between Republicans and Democrats on that issue.
Yes.
And primarily around the redrawing of districts, voting districts. I remember the Jackson Airport issue was a very big issue that was under protest.
Yes.
As well as 1523.
Yes.
Do you think any of those issues will be revisited during this session?
I think they possibly can be revisited. But let me say this about those issues in terms of the gridlock in the legislature, in terms of reading bills and this idea of protest. A lot of what happens in this process is not so much about the actual legislation itself, but it's about how we go about doing things. And a lot of that protest and that gridlock came about because of an attitude in a new administration. It may not have been purposeful, but it came across that way as, look, we have a supermajority. We'll do what we very well like, and we'll do what we very well please, in spite of what you may or may not like. And so this idea of not having a voice in the process, not being able to participate on an equal level, understanding that you're not going to win most of the battles, but at least let's have a battle. Let the process work. Let's have a back and forth to examine ideas and have it, give them a full vetting in the process. And that's what the protest was about. Not so much about the legislation itself, but about being able to take full advantage of the process.
But did you, as a Democrat, did you take it as intentional?
I personally didn't take it as intentional, but I understand the people who did. I've always been able to, have a back and forth, a open discourse with leadership, whether it be Republican or Democrat, and I still do. Speaker Gunn and I talk. We talk personally and we talk individually. I could go in and talk about some issues that I think, he may need to adjust his position, and he is open to listening. Everybody doesn't feel that way, and so I've encouraged the leadership to be more open with everybody. Everybody is not necessarily as assertive as I am, so you need to have more of an open door, open arm policy. Now, we didn't get off to a very good start, given what happened yesterday in the management committee, where they, deemed all contracts secret. These are public contracts. These are public monies we're spending on contracts. And what you're saying is that not only can the public not see them, but legislators can look at them, but you can't copy them, you can't take them home and read them, you can't examine them. This restriction, we just have to be more open. And I think it just breeds a lot more contempt when you do that.
It doesn't sound like, from what you're telling me, that part of the process will be transparent from now on.
Well, they said it wouldn't.
But why?
Look, I have that same question. Why? Why not? If it's public money, if it's a public contract, and they're doing public business, why wouldn't it be open? There's no proprietary interest in a public contract. We're not competing with another state. This is what we're doing. So it doesn't make any sense. And what it does is, there may be some very logical reason for doing it. I don't know what it may be, but you have to keep your eye on the fact that it breeds distrust. And I just don't think it's good. And I think I would encourage the leadership to go back and look at that particular rule and look at how they proceed. Because when you talk about the gridlock we had last year, those kind of actions are the very things that cause that kind of gridlock. People feeling like you were constricting them, not allowing them to have open and full debate, not allowing them to see all the information that was available to them. This whole, being too paternal and saying, sit down, don't say anything, it's just not the way it works. We're an open democratic process, and that's the way we need to operate. And so I just don't think you start out, when you start out saying we're going to lock information away from the public, and to a certain extent lock information away from certain legislators, I just think that's a little bit too much.